Imagine standing in the pitch-black New Mexico desert, hearing a sound that isn't quite human. You realize the legend you were warned never to speak of is standing right behind you. In the vast silence of the American Southwest, some secrets are best left buried in the sand. What happens when the ancient monsters of folklore suddenly become the terrifying reality of the present? For the Navajo people, even whispering a name alone is considered a dangerous invitation to darkness. This is the realm of the Skinwalker, a paranormal entity deeply rooted in Native American culture. To those who know the truth, the Skinwalker is like a shadow that replaces your soul. These powerful shapeshifters represent the ultimate corruption of medicine and traditional spiritual ways. Their existence is a closely guarded secret, spoken of only in hushed tones by firelight. Why is a single name considered such a dangerous invitation to these malevolent, shifting forces? The sacred Navajo communities are spread across the rugged landscapes of New Mexico and Arizona. Their ancestral lands also stretch into the high plateaus of Utah and the mountains of Colorado. This sprawling territory is where the lines between our world and the supernatural begin to blur. In the 1970s, two battle-hardened veterans found themselves caught in this very web of mystery. They were traveling through the desolate stretches of New Mexico, far from the safety of civilization. Among these men was a Navajo soldier who understood the ancient warnings his companion ignored. Having survived the horrors of the Vietnam War, they thought they had seen every possible nightmare. But nothing in their military training could prepare them for what lurked in the desert shadows. They were soon to learn that some enemies cannot be fought with traditional rifles or steel. To understand why these veterans were left trembling, we must face the entity they refused to name. In the heart of the Four Corners, there is a heavy silence that speaks volumes to those who listen. To the Navajo, these are not just spooky stories. They are a living, breathing danger fueled by malice. These entities are known as skinwalkers, and their very existence is a chilling reality for the local people. According to ancient Navajo belief, skinwalkers are highly dangerous creatures stalking the New Mexico desert at night. They are not mere animals, but harmful witches who have traded their humanity for dark, supernatural powers. These practitioners of dark magic often rob graves to gather wealth and gruesome ingredients for their rituals. What drives a person to trade their soul for such a twisted and terrifying gift? Their actions are often born from a toxic mix of greed, anger, and deep-seated envy. Sometimes, they strike out of simple spite or a burning desire for cold, calculated revenge. Imagine an enemy that can look like your neighbor or your best friend before showing its teeth. This ability to shift shape makes them a predator that is almost impossible to defend against. For many Navajo people, even mentioning their name is considered a dangerous and forbidden taboo. Talking about a skinwalker is like lighting a signal fire for a predator in the dark. Whispering the name might invite their unwanted attention directly to your own front door. Because of this fear, many families stay silent, hoping the shadows will not notice their presence. This cultural silence protects the community from the spiritual danger that lurks just out of sight. Yet, even in the modern world, the fear of these ancient shapeshifters remains incredibly potent. The stories passed down through generations serve as a grim warning of the malice hidden in the desert. To cross paths with one is to invite a darkness that few have ever survived. But in our modern world, the most dangerous shapeshifters do not live in the desert, they live in our data. While data hides modern secrets, the New Mexico desert conceals manifestations of ancient, physical terrors. The Skinwalker is a practitioner of forbidden magic, known in Navajo culture as a harmful witch. These entities are driven by the lowest human impulses like greed, anger, and cold revenge. They operate within the shadows of the Four Corners, fueled by spite and deep-seated envy. According to ancient belief, these witches rob graves to gather wealth and dark ritual ingredients. The transformation process begins with a ritual that demands the total sacrifice of one's humanity. Imagine the sickening sound of bones cracking as a human form twists into something predatory. A skinwalker possesses the dark gift to shed their skin and become a soaring desert bird. They might also take the form of a silent deer, watching from the desert brush. Sightings of massive wolves running with unnatural speed across the sand are frequent and terrifying. Coyotes with haunting, human-like eyes prowl the outskirts of Deming, New Mexico, on moonless nights. This shifting of shapes is not a painless miracle, but a violent and agonizing physical ordeal. Each change leaves a permanent scar on the soul and a heavy toll on the body. For Vietnam War veterans returning home, these shadows felt more dangerous than a jungle ambush. The soldiers recognized the smell of death and malice that follow these ancient, shifting creatures. A chemical attack leaves less of a stain than the presence of a vengeful shapeshifter. Inside the VA hospital, whispered stories about the Yossi began to circulate among the wounded. These men knew that some monsters do not need a uniform to wage a private war. The dry desert heat often masks the chilling breath of a witch seeking their next grave. To see a skinwalker is to witness the total corruption of nature for personal power. Their motives remain as dark as the pits they dig in search of their forbidden wealth. As the sun sets over New Mexico, the line between man and beast begins to blur. A skinwalker steals your face to do harm, but a hacker steals your identity to destroy your life. We talk about monsters in the desert, but the real-world predators are already inside your phone. This hidden digital battlefield is why Aura is stepping in to sponsor today's journey into the unknown. Imagine your entire history exposed to the highest bidder in the darkest corners of the internet. I felt this vulnerability personally when my social security number was stolen in a major AT&T breach. It is a terrifying realization that your most private information is no longer under your own control. This is not a rare occurrence, as billions of records are harvested by malicious actors every single year. Over 2.9 billion records were stolen from national public data, proving that no one is truly safe. In this digital age, your identity is the most valuable thing a modern predator can possibly take. Is your personal information currently sitting on the dark web, waiting for someone to claim your name? Or acts like a digital lookout, tirelessly guarding your perimeter while you sleep in the dead of night? They provide a comprehensive suite of tools designed to keep your private data far from reaching the wrong hands. With Aura, you receive instant alerts if your information is found anywhere it simply should not be. Their advanced systems monitor the dark web around the clock to ensure your identity remains yours alone. Beyond monitoring, Aura includes a secure VPN and powerful antivirus software to shield all of your devices. Their password manager locks your digital doors, making it nearly impossible for intruders to gain easy entry. How much is your peace of mind worth when the threats are invisible and constantly evolving? Aura offers $5 million of identity theft insurance to help you recover if the unthinkable happens. You do not have to face these modern shapeshifters alone when you have a dedicated guardian watching. Visit the link in the description to start your free trial and secure your digital life today. Do not wait for a breach to happen before you decide to protect what is rightfully yours. Now, let us go back to 1970s New Mexico, where the threat was physical and lung-searing. The legend didn't emerge from a vacuum, it was forged in the fire of ancient, bloody conflict. Before they were monsters, they were protectors, born from a period of absolute and desperate necessity. Long before the 1970s, a dark shadow began stretching across the vast New Mexico landscape. In the early 1500s, the world of the Navajo changed forever with the arrival of Spanish explorers. These newcomers did not bring peace, but instead carried steel, disease, and a hunger for conquest. As the Spanish soldiers pushed inland, they left a trail of fear that echoed through the canyons. Could a desperate people be blamed for seeking a terrifying edge against these relentless, armored invaders? The Spanish launched brutal raids on indigenous settlements, searching for more than just gold and land. Soldiers snatched people from their homes, dragging them away to face a life of grueling slave labor. Families were torn apart as the invaders kidnapped men, women, and children for their distant colonies. The traditional ways of protection were failing against the overwhelming power of European weaponry and horses. In this era of suffering, certain individuals began searching for a power that defied the natural laws. This ancient power was a double-edged sword, forged in the crucible of the 16th century struggle. These seekers looked toward the animal kingdom, finding strengths that no human warrior could ever possess. They sought the ability to move unseen through the brush and strike with the speed of lightning. Through forbidden rituals, it is believed these people gained the gift to shed their human forms completely. These first skinwalkers became the ultimate scouts, watching the Spanish from the shadows of the mesas. They could transform into soaring birds, watching the movement of troops from the high desert winds. Others took the form of the swift deer, vanishing into the forest before a soldier could fire. Some chose the coyote or the wolf, gaining the cunning and predatory instincts needed to survive. Where does protection end and corruption begin when one invites such a primal force inside? The gift of the shapeshifter offered salvation from slavery, but it carried a heavy, spiritual price. What started as a desperate defense eventually twisted into the dark taboo we recognize today. This ancient power was passed down through generations, hidden away from the prying eyes of outsiders. Centuries later, the echoes of this 1500s magic still resonate in the quiet corners of New Mexico. From the ancient battlefields to the modern VA hospital, the legacy of the Skinwalker persists. Near the town of Deming, the old stories took on a new, horrifying life for Thomas. Haunted by a chemical attack during the Vietnam War, he returned home to a different struggle. Alongside his companion Yossi, Thomas would soon discover that some ancient gifts are actually curses. This ancient power was passed down, but for one veteran named Thomas, the gift would become a nightmare. In a letter to researchers Gary and Wendy Swanson, the man we'll call Thomas finally spoke. Thomas kept this secret for decades, a weight he only shared when he knew the end was near. These researchers are the authors of the book Skinwalker, Shapeshifters, and Native American Curses. Thomas's story was like a buried landmine, silently waiting for the right moment to surface and explode. Why wait 40 years to tell the truth about an encounter that defied all known logic? The original story was written by a U.S. Army veteran who only signed it with the initials T's. To protect his legacy and privacy, we will refer to this unknown soldier as Thomas. What makes a man finally break his silence after holding a terrifying secret for nearly half a century? The veteran reached out to the Swansons to ensure his experience would never be forgotten or dismissed. Gary and Wendy Swanson recognized that this was a credible and deeply reluctant witness of high standing. His words reveal a chilling encounter that haunted him from the desert sands to his later years. The Swansons documented his harrowing account alongside other supernatural reports in their famous literary work. Thomas felt the heavy burden of his memory pressing down harder as his own time ran short. He wanted the world to understand the darkness he saw under the vast New Mexico sky. For years, the old soldier lived with a shadow that followed him long after his service ended. His testimony provides a rare look into how ancient terrors can intersect with the modern military world. Gary and Wendy Swanson realized immediately that Thomas's account was far more than just a ghost story. It was a detailed report of a physical manifestation that defied every piece of his tactical training. Thomas was a man of facts and discipline, yet he could never explain that night in Deming. But to understand his state of mind, we have to go back to the humid jungles of Vietnam. Vietnam was a crucible for Thomas, but his ultimate fire was a deadly chemical one. During the height of the Vietnam War, Thomas served with a team in the dense jungles. While deep in an undisclosed country, his unit faced a sudden, devastating chemical weapons attack. The air itself turned into a toxic mist that clawed at their throats and eyes. The war didn't just take his youth, it took his very ability to breathe clearly. The chemical exposure left Thomas with lungs that were permanently and painfully scarred for life. After a harrowing extraction from the combat zone, Thomas was rushed to an emergency facility. He spent a grueling month in a hospital ward, fighting for every single shallow breath. With his deployment cut short, He was eventually sent back to his home in Indiana. The quiet of the Midwest offered no relief for his damaged, gasping respiratory system. His lungs felt like scorched earth, a constant reminder of the day everything went wrong. Standard treatments failed to heal the deep, physical trauma carved into his very chest. Did this physical trauma leave him uniquely sensitive to the strange things lurking in the dark? Driven by desperation, Thomas looked toward the dry air of the American Southwest for survival. This search for a cure eventually led him to a small, isolated clinic in Deming. New Mexico offered a promise of relief, but it held secrets far more ancient than war. A broken soldier seeking silence found himself entering a land where the silence speaks volumes. The chemical attack was the catalyst that pushed him into the path of the Skinwalker. Scarred and searching, Thomas arrived in the desert, unaware of the shadows watching his arrival. He came to Deming for his lungs, but he would find something that challenged his soul. Military witnesses bring a unique, grounded perspective to the most unsettling paranormal encounters ever recorded. These soldiers are trained to observe reality with a precision that civilians rarely possess under pressure. Thomas and Dave were no exception, forged by 8 years of service in the same unit. Their bond was tempered in the humid, unforgiving jungles of the Vietnam War during the 60s. Years of combat experience had hardened them against the typical fears that haunt the average mind. They had survived things most people only see in nightmares while serving their country abroad. This includes a devastating chemical attack that would change the course of Thomas's life forever. When a soldier reports seeing something impossible, their testimony carries the weight of tactical discipline. For Thomas, the horrors of war were a prelude to the mysteries waiting in New Mexico. He traded the dense jungles for the stark, sun-bleached landscapes surrounding the quiet town of Deming. The VA hospital in this region often treated veterans who carried scars both visible and hidden. In the high-stress world of the military, strange events are often viewed through a lens of survival. Yet, the legends of the Navajo Skinwalker require a different kind of mental fortification to process. Thomas found himself questioning everything he knew about the natural world while recovering in the desert. That chemical attack had left him physically weakened, but mentally sharp and alert to his surroundings. He and Dave shared a history of trust that allowed them to believe the unbelievable together. They were men of action, not prone to flights of fancy or the exaggerations of ghost stories. In the desert, a shapeshifter is more than a myth. It is a predator that tests resolve. The military mind seeks to categorize and neutralize threats, even those that defy conventional physical laws. Every strange sound in the New Mexico night was analyzed with the same intensity as combat. Their background makes them the perfect witnesses to events that others would simply choose to ignore. High-stress environments often thin the veil between our world and the darkness that lurks just beyond. Thomas realized that his time in Vietnam had prepared him for an entirely different kind of battle. The shadows of the desert were moving in ways that reminded him of the jungle's hidden dangers. This military precision is why the encounter in Deming remains one of the most credible accounts known. Deming, New Mexico, was supposed to be a place of healing, a quiet experimental trial. 5 years after returning from the horrors of the Vietnam War, Thomas received a mysterious invitation. A specialized clinic in the high desert offered a chance to escape the lingering chemical attack damage. He traveled to this remote facility, seeking relief from the scars he had carried for so long. The clinic was isolated, a place where the modern world seemed to fade into the red dust. In a room of 17 dying men, Thomas suddenly saw a ghost from his forgotten past. Sitting among the patients was a face he recognized from the mud and fire of Southeast Asia. It was Dave Longlass, a fellow veteran who had survived the same crucible of war years ago. The two U.S. Army veterans sat in the sterile silence of the clinic, processing the impossible coincidence. What are the odds of two friends from the same unit ending up in this obscure trial? Finding Dave in this place was like finding a single familiar face in a crowd of shadows. Both men were struggling with the long-term effects of their service and the VA hospital's limitations. As they began their medical treatments, the shared history between them sparked anew, an easy connection. Dave carried the quiet strength of his Navajo heritage, a grounding force in the clinical environment. They were two of only 17 patients chosen for this experimental attempt at recovery. In the 1970s, Deming was a crossroads for those seeking answers that traditional medicine couldn't provide. The reunion felt less like a chance meeting and more like a deliberate alignment of fate. Thomas listened as Dave spoke of things far stranger than the chemical ghosts of their shared service. The atmosphere in the clinic shifted as they shared tales of shadows lurking in the high desert. But Dave long last wasn't just a friend. He was the key to a world Thomas never knew existed. The bond between these two men was forged in a fire that very few people could ever understand. 8 long years to brutal deployments. One shared tragedy that changed the course of their lives forever. Thomas and Dave were more than just soldiers. They were brothers bound by blood and bitter experience. For 8 years, they served side by side in the same military unit, facing the unknown with unwavering grit. Their lives were intertwined through the rhythmic chaos of training and the terrifying silence of the battlefield. During 2 separate overseas deployments, they relied on each other to survive the darkest nights of war. How much can you truly trust a man you have bled with in the heat of combat? For Thomas and Dave, the answer was written in the scars they both carried from the Vietnam War. Is there any bond stronger than shared survival against odds that should have broken any ordinary man? Their friendship acted as an anchor in a life that had been drifting aimlessly since the war ended. During their second deployment, a sudden and terrifying chemical attack changed everything for the two young soldiers. The invisible poison seeped into their bodies, leaving them both with permanent and debilitating lung damage. Every painful breath they took served as a constant, burning reminder of the day they almost died together. While Thomas struggled with his health in the city, Dave eventually returned home to the Navajo country. The high deserts of New Mexico offered a quiet refuge for a man haunted by modern warfare-esque ghosts. Thomas, a white man, and Dave, a Navajo, represented two worlds connected by a single, unbreakable military line. Their cultural differences vanished in the shadow of the VA hospital wards where they spent months recovering. This racial and cultural bridge would soon become the foundation for a journey into the ancient unknown. They had survived human enemies and chemical warfare, but a different kind of predator was waiting in Deming. Dave's heritage held secrets that would soon challenge everything Thomas believed about the physical and spirit worlds. Their shared history of pain was about to collide head-on with the dark legends of the Navajo people. In the silence of the desert, the Skinwalker was watching, waiting for the veterans to let their guard down. It started with a simple invitation to see something that defied every law of nature. The atmosphere changed when Rick, an old friend of Dave's, suddenly entered the picture. Rick was more than just a face from the past. He was a bridge to another world. In the quiet town of Deming, Rick spent his days working at a local car dealership. He was a Navajo man who understood the desert's secrets better than any outsider ever could. Rick and Dave shared a history that stretched back to their days in high school together. This connection provided a rare moment of trust in a place where shadows often whispered lies. One evening, Rick approached the two veterans with a proposal that felt dangerously out of place. He spoke of a secretive gathering taking place far beyond the reach of the city lights. Rick didn't use modern terms. He spoke of men he called the ancient shapeshifters. To Thomas and Dave, the very idea of shapeshifters sounded like a fever dream. Yet, the conviction in Rick's voice suggested that he wasn't telling a tall tale. Would you get in a car with a stranger to see a legend come to life? For these veterans, the curiosity was a pull that proved much stronger than their lingering fear. Rick's invitation was like a key to a door that should have remained permanently locked. Why would Rick want to outsiders to witness a sacred taboo hidden from the world? Perhaps he saw something in these men that made them worthy of the desert's deepest truths. They agreed to follow him, leaving the safety of the VA hospital and Deming behind. The trio piled into a vehicle, ready to confront the impossible under the New Mexico stars. Rick took the wheel, steering them toward the jagged horizon where the pavement eventually ended. The headlights cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but dust and the skeletal arms of cacti. They drove 30 miles into the void, leaving every trace of civilization far behind them. The silence of the desert began to weigh heavy on the veterans as they traveled deeper. Every mile felt like they were peeling back a layer of the reality they once knew. Rick remained quiet, his eyes fixed on the road that wasn't really a road at all. Thomas felt the familiar tension of the Vietnam War returning to his weary, chemical-scarred lungs. They were moving toward a confrontation with the unexplained, guided only by an old friend's word. The destination was a place where the line between man and beast supposedly ceased to exist. As the engine hummed, they braced themselves for whatever waited in the heart of the waste. The journey was just beginning, and there was no turning back from what lay ahead. Their headlights finally died, leaving them swallowed by the absolute silence of the New Mexico desert night. The cool air rushed in as Thomas and Dave stepped cautiously into the vast, unknown darkness. Deep in the desert, they reached a place where the rules of the modern world didn't apply. The first thing Thomas saw wasn't the fire, but the cold barrel of a loaded shotgun. A lone Navajo lookout emerged from the shadows, his eyes fixed intently on the two outsiders. He stood like a silent sentinel, guarding secrets buried deep within this ancient and rugged landscape. Every instinct from the Vietnam War screamed at Thomas that they were walking into a dangerous trap. Beyond the armed guard, a massive bonfire flickered like a lonely island in an ocean of darkness. The orange flames danced against the obsidian sky, casting long and distorted shadows across the sand. As they drew closer, the sheer scale of the desert gathering began to reveal its true form. A sizable group of Navajo men stood gathered around the roaring heat of the central fire. Their faces were etched with a gravity suggesting this was no ordinary or casual social meeting. The crackling wood was the only sound in a world that seemed to hold its collective breath. This secretive ritual was a sacred space where the modern digital age felt like a distant memory. The veterans felt the weight of hundreds of years of tradition pressing down upon their heavy shoulders. Suddenly, the air grew thick with a warning that chilled them more than the desert night air. One of the men stepped forward, his voice low and heavy with a terrifying, absolute promise. Thomas and Dave were warned they would face a painful death if they spoke of this night. The threat was clear. What happens in the desert stays in the desert, or you won't leave. Then, the warning was issued. What you see here stays here, or you won't leave at all. The warning still rings in Thomas's ears as the Navajo night becomes unnervingly still and heavy. Far from the safety of Deming, New Mexico, an ancient presence begins to stir within the shadows. To understand this darkness, one must know the Yossi, the Navajo guardians of the spiritual world. These figures are often whispered about as witches, powerful beings who bridge our reality and the void. The Yossi serve as sentinels, watching over secrets that have remained hidden for countless, blood-soaked generations. Within this sacred circle, the line between man and predator starts to blur into something far more primal. Thomas watches in silence. A moderator steps forward, his movements deliberate and filled with ancient purpose. A heavy shell of weathered animal skin is draped carefully around Rick's broad, trembling shoulders. This skin is more than a garment. It is a catalyst for a change no modern science can explain. The rough fur seems to pulse against him, carrying the weight of a creature that died long ago, like the halls of a VA hospital. This desert air thickens with a heavy, unsettling scent. Rick stands at the center, a shapeshifter caught between his humanity and the legend he is becoming. In his hand, he grips a handful of ritual powder, its origin as mysterious as the ritual itself. The fire crackles with unnatural intensity, casting long, distorted shadows against the jagged New Mexico rocks. Thomas remembers the chemical attacks of the Vietnam War, but this impending explosion feels far more personal. With a sudden, sharp motion, Rick flings the ritual powder directly into the heart of the flames. An immediate explosion of thick, gray smoke erupts, swallowing the entire clearing in a blinding, choking cloud. The world vanishes behind a veil of ash, leaving the witnesses trapped in a sudden, terrifying sensory void. This chemical reaction marks the beginning of the shift, where the physical form yields to the spiritual. Within that dense cloud, the Skinwalker begins to emerge as cracking bone echoes against the desert floor. The moderator stands like a statue, his eyes reflecting the dying embers of the now smoldering fire. Nothing in Thomas's military training prepared him for the sight that is about to claw its way out. The powder hit the flames, and the world went white in a sudden, blinding explosion of light. Before the flash, a silent moderator stepped forward to drape a heavy animal skin over Rick's shoulders. This shell of dead fur seemed to pulse with a dark, ancient energy in the flickering firelight. In Navajo tradition, these ceremonies are often guarded by powerful and terrifying witches known as the Yosi. These Yosi are the traditional guardians of a spiritual world that most humans are never meant to see. Rick reached into his pouch, gripping a handful of fine powder that shimmered like ground obsidian. With a single, sharp motion, he hurled the substance directly into the heart of the roaring desert fire. An instantaneous explosion of thick, oily smoke erupted, swallowing Rick whole within a massive, dark cloud. The air grew heavy with the scent of ozone and something ancient that smelled like wet earth. Thomas strained his eyes, watching the churning black smoke swirl violently in the cold New Mexico night. As the haze began to clear, the silhouette remaining where Rick once stood was horrifyingly, impossibly tall. A 7-foot creature now loomed over the embers, casting a long, jagged shadow across the desert floor. This was no longer a man, but a biological nightmare that defied every known law of modern science. Its body was shaped like a giant praying mantis, elongated and terrifyingly thin against the starlit sky. Thick, dark feathers covered its chitinous limbs, rustling softly like dry leaves in a ghost town. Most unsettling of all was the creature's head, which bore the snarling, predatory features of a timber wolf. The wolfish face twitched with a hunger that felt both animalistic and chillingly, deeply intelligent. How do you process a creature that defies every law of biology while standing right before you? Thomas stood frozen, wondering if that was still Rick or if something else had finally taken his place. In that terrifying moment, Thomas knew everything he thought he knew about reality was a total lie. 2 days later, the ritual ended in a way that defied every single law of logic. The magic of the night was suddenly followed by the cold, harsh reality of the morning. On a lonely stretch of road, two motorists reported a violent collision with a large deer. They watched as the animal fell, its life extinguished instantly by the force of the impact. A patrolman arrived shortly after, finding the dead creature lying exactly where the witnesses had claimed. Following standard procedure, he dragged the heavy carcass into a nearby ravine to clear the road. The woods fell silent again, holding a secret that would not be revealed for 48 hours. 2 full days passed before a gruesome discovery was made in that same shallow roadside ditch. Instead of a deer, the mangled remains of Rick were found for miles outside of town. The physical evidence suggested a terrifying exchange had occurred in the darkness of the desert night. Investigators were baffled by how a struck deer could seemingly transform into a missing human man. It was as if a glitch in the fabric of the universe had swapped their bodies. Questions began to circulate about whether Rick's Skinwalker transformation had never fully reversed its course. How does a creature struck by a speeding car suddenly become a man in a ditch? The patrolman, who moved the deer, was left questioning his own memory and the physical world. No trace of the original animal remained, leaving only the broken body of a Vietnam veteran. The location matched perfectly, yet the biological reality had shifted into something impossible and hauntingly grim. This unsettling event in New Mexico added a dark chapter to the legend of the shifting Skinwalker. Thomas and the others could only watch as the horrific aftermath of their ritual finally unfolded. The deer was gone, Rick was there, and the world simply kept on turning. Time passed, and the desert winds slowly buried the tracks of that haunting, moonlit night. Dave long last took the weight of their impossible secret all the way to his grave. But for Thomas, the memory remained as sharp as a jagged piece of cold mountain flint. Is a secret truly still a secret if everyone else involved is finally gone? Decades had slipped away since their time at the VA hospital in Deming, New Mexico. The trauma of the Vietnam War was supposed to be the only ghost Thomas carried. Yet the image of the Yossi and that terrifying shapeshifter never once faded from view. Thomas lived through a chemical attack, but this spiritual encounter proved much harder to survive. He watched as the world moved on, oblivious to the ancient powers lurking in the shadows. For 40 long years, he kept the ritual hidden behind a wall of heavy, painful silence. Sharing this story was like finally exhaling after holding his breath for 40 long years. Does telling the truth finally bring peace to a soul burdened by such impossible knowledge? He sat down and began to write, his hands trembling with the weight of the past. Every word he penned about the Navajo ritual felt like a stone lifted from his chest. Dave long last was no longer here to bear witness to the madness they had seen together. This letter was a final tribute to a friend and a terrifying truth that demanded light. The silence of the desert had been his only companion until he chose to speak out. He detailed the transformation and the impossible exchange that defied every single law of logic. Thomas knew that some people would never believe the horrors he and Dave had witnessed. But the truth doesn't require belief to remain standing firm in the harsh morning light. The fog of war hides many secrets, but some things refuse to stay hidden forever. Thomas's account is just one of many that emerge from the deep shadows of the American Southwest. This concludes our after-action report on the strange events that unfolded near Deming, New Mexico. New Mexico is famously called the land of enchantment, but that beauty often hides a darker truth. What happens when that enchantment turns into something predatory, ancient, and entirely impossible to explain? The desert is a place where the lines between physical reality and spiritual nightmare often blur. For veterans like Thomas and Yossi, the horrors of the Vietnam War followed them home to Deming. They sought healing at the local VA hospital, only to find themselves face-to-face with a Navajo legend. The Skinwalker is not just a story told around campfires, it is a living, breathing desert terror. Whether triggered by a chemical attack or ancient ritual, the shapeshifter remains an enduring mystery. This specific story is just one tiny grain of sand in a vast desert full of secrets. Countless other witnesses remain silent, keeping their terrifying encounters locked away in the darkness. Have you ever looked out into the desert night and seen something that shouldn't exist? Perhaps you have felt a heavy silence that warned you to turn back before it was too late. We invite you to step forward and share your own accounts of the unexplained and the unknown. What haunting legends are currently hiding in the shadows of your own backyard or local woods? Your stories help us piece together the fractured reality of these strange and ancient manifestations. The Southwest keeps its secrets well, but the truth always finds a way to the surface. As the wind whistles through the mesas, remember that some shadows have a life of their own. Stay vigilant, keep your eyes on the horizon, and never ignore the feeling of being watched. Until the next report, remember that the most dangerous monsters are often the ones we cannot see.